Hello and welcome. This is Dave Solano from DeGruyter, and I'm joined by three colleagues from across the library and press ecosystem. Today, we will be talking about eBook business model roulette for university presses, landing on a sustainable outcome. We've got about 30 minutes of presentations followed by 10 minutes of Q&As. But before we get to the presentations or the Q&A, a little bit of an introduction on the topic as well as for the speakers. eBook business models have flooded the library ecosystem over the past few years, providing libraries with a myriad of choices. From complete collection output offerings to pick and choose titles, to EBA and single titles, not only do libraries have a lot to think about, but also the presses and aggregators that are offering the content. However, where does press sustainability play a part in all of these decisions? For example, for libraries, does press sustainability play any part when a collection development librarian is divvying up their budgets? For aggregators, for example, is press sustainability on their mind when they're coming up with different business models or negotiating prices? And on the press side of things, how much of an impact does the concept of press sustainability have on deciding which titles to publish? Taking all of this a step further, what is the future of eBook business models for university presses? And also, does open access play any part in these future eBook models? We've got a great panel lined up for you. Starting off will be Eric Van Ryn from the University of California Press. He's the executive director there. We'll be providing his perspective from a prestigious North American university press. Following Eric is Kathleen Folger at the University of Michigan, electronic resources officer, and we'll be providing her point of view from a major research institution. I will then be following Kathleen, and I'll be representing an aggregator. And finally, we're joined by Jo Grieg from Bristol University Press, who will be talking about her opinions related to this topic from a UK-based international university press. So without further ado, Eric, you're up.
All right, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I was just going to start by talking about really kind of the whole, sort of ebook ecosystem within the academic library environment. And sort of, when you asked me to address this from a university press perspective, the first thing that came to mind was really managing chaos at this point. I think there's actually, quite a big shift that's happened in the last 10 years to ebook buying in academic libraries. And the whole way that university presses approach the academic library market has had to change to correspond with the shift in distribution models to students and faculty and other patrons in the academic library ecosystem. So if you could move on to the next slide. So as presses really think about approaching this model, it's become critical to think about what models actually work for the press. This whole business started for us back in the late 90s, early aughts with NetLibrary and eBrary approaching us about different models for selling into the academic library market, but it didn't really account for much in terms of revenue. So I think presses were more in experimentation mode, and that experimentation mode kind of gradually ramped up over the course of the next 10 or 15 years. And, as it's become a more important part of their kind of sales revenue ecosystem, presses have had to balance a number of considerations in thinking about how to approach the academic library ecosystem. The first is thinking about maximizing revenue. This is important. Presses are all cost recovery units, and we need to think about how we can maximize revenue. We also, as university presses, need to think about maximizing impact and usage for the scholars that we publish, right? Our authors publish to get read and used and cited, and it's our job to sort of help that in, help them find their audience. We also have to think about our library partners. We are situated in the academic ecosystem as well. We're part of universities, and we have to think about librarians' purchasing constraints and collection strategies. We have to think about supporting our mission for our particular press. And increasingly, we're also having to think about supporting sustainable open access publishing models. So it's a whole host of considerations that we have to balance as a university press in approaching this market. Unlike consumer channels, there's really a plethora of business models that are being used. The consumer market is really easy for us to understand and kind of get a handle on. We sell one copy of a book to each consumer, whether it's an ebook or a print book. For the most part, that's it. It's done. We sell one copy, one person gets to use it. In the library world, as you can see, there are a whole host of strategies that are being deployed by academic libraries on the basic presumption that things can be distributed to multiple users at any time 24/7. So if you can move on to the next slide. So the digital library economy is really what drives the ebook business now. And as presses, what we have seen is a growing preference for ebooks in academic library collections. And we need to think about a strategy for addressing that, since a lot of our stakeholders are on campus. A lot of people who might be otherwise buying the books as consumers are on campus, whether they're students or faculty. And about 50 to 80% of a press's revenues come from consumer sales. So we have to think about not only how we maximize usage and impact for our authors and how we maximize distribution for the content, but also how we preserved backlist sales models, which are driven by consumer purchases of our books. And that can range from anywhere to 50 or 8 to 80% of a press's revenue. So the solution for many presses in this kind of unlimited DRM-free world is managing pricing strategies, managing access models, and thinking in a more fine-grained way about how we distribute content on campus, and working with our academic library partners to come up with distribution models that work. One of the things that can lead to a more sustainable model is a collection sales strategy, which involves the library buying a press's entire front list, essentially. And we found that that can be successful, but it's relatively new to us. So we're still learning about how collections can work for a press. So the last thing that I'll speak to is this sort of digital shift in open access. So as presses have been trying to experiment with ways to adequately serve a desire to make content openly accessible, we're having to think about how libraries can play a role in the shift to sustainable OA monographs. So a lot of questions that I would ask about this, I don't necessarily have all the answers, are, can a collection-based strategy allow for library funding of an OA shift? But if you answer that question in the affirmative, you also need to think about whether a library strategy that involves libraries funding open access can make the library solely responsible for that shift. In other words, where is the money going to come from in addition to the libraries? We know that there's some money that comes in through print sales of monographs, for instance, but we have to think about balancing a diversity of funding sources to support sustainable open access. So we have to think through a number of these strategies as we're thinking about moving into a more open access driven world, and what libraries can play, what role libraries can play in it. So with that, I'll turn it over to, I think, Kathleen.
Thanks, Eric. So I am going to talk from the librarian's perspective, and more specifically from the University of Michigan, which is a large research library. And first, what I want to talk about is whether there is a right ebook model. And if we look at the next slide, we'll see that from my perspective, there is no one right business model that works for all libraries. There's not even a model that works for a single library every time. There are a lot of factors that go into determining what the right model is when acquiring content. The context in which the library operates influences the business models. What academic programs are we serving? What's the size of our budget? Do we have space considerations? Staff considerations, or a whole number of factors on our side that we think about. But then we also need to think about factors on the press's side. The nature of the content. Is the subject in alignment with our academic programs? Are we talking about front list or backlist titles? How well known is the press? What's its reputation? What's the quality of its content? So all of those kind of factor into our decision-making process. For the University of Michigan, we actually have a wide variety of business models we're using for ebooks. We have complete copyright year collections, so we just make a commitment in advance that we're going to purchase all of the titles that the press has on their ebook platform. We do title by title, where we have an approval plan that brings in a certain number of titles, and then we supplement that with firm orders where we identify specific titles we want. We're doing open access crowdfunded ebook collections, the Path to Open, Fund to Mission, Direct to Open, whatever it's called. We're very interested in it because we do have, especially as a public institution, we feel an obligation to support research broadly, and open access helps us to achieve that goal. We also do demand-driven acquisition and evidence-based acquisition. To date, with those, we've only done those with commercial publishers, not with any university presses. And I should note that this list is from the one we use most often to the one we use least frequently. So for Michigan, that frontless complete copyright year is the model we use most frequently, and then demand-driven and evidence-based are the least used models. The reason why we prefer a complete frontless collection is simply it's the breadth of our academic programs. We have more than 110 academic programs that are they're graduate programs that are ranked in the top 10 by various ranking agencies. So we collect very broadly and very deeply. We also have significant space constraints at this time, so we are looking at ebooks as a way to help alleviate some of that pressure. And we also find that using the complete collection helps save the time of our subject specialists. Increasingly, they're being asked to do all kinds of things not related to collection development. They work on research data management plans, they're doing instruction, they're doing reference, they're doing all kinds of other things. And so as much as possible, we try to save their time from having to make individual decisions. So just an entire package is a real time saver for them. When we're considering whether to purchase from a publisher, we look at past purchasing history, the number of titles, cost per volume, and we have been willing to spend a little more than we currently spend on a press when we move to ebook frontless, since we gain more and better access to the content. Our next one of the challenges we have a couple of challenges with complete collection purchasing. Knowing which titles are not in the collection is a huge one. So what we would love is if we could have an exclusion list sent to all the customers that indicate which formats the excluded titles are available in and from what vendor. But if that's not available, just a simple list of these books are not going to be in your package, because we're likely to want to buy them. So we need to know we're not getting them in the package, and we need to find a separate, a different method of acquiring it. We also have problems with getting MARC records from our ILS vendors. We use ALMA. Ideally, we would get those MARC records even prior to publication, so we could load them as on-order records. That's something our faculty ask about all the time, because if they don't see a record in the catalog, they assume we haven't purchased it and aren't planning on purchasing it. I'll talk really briefly about what we're doing in title by title purchasing. So we still purchase a significant number of monographs title by title. The number is going down each year, but that's not because we're buying fewer monographs. It's just the method we're using to acquire monographs is changing. We are moving more to front list ebook collections and doing a little bit with GDA and a little bit with EBA. Currently, our approvals are 98 to 99% print. That's because our profile is, the approval profile we have is pretty complicated and intertwined. So we're in the process of migrating to Rialto, and we are going to be disentangling our approval profiles, which might mean more of our title by title ordering would be for ebooks. Firm orders, when an individual selector makes a decision to purchase a title, is 2/3 print, 1/3 ebook, but we recently developed guidance for our subject specialists indicating that ebook is our preferred format. So again, that may be changing. We like open access models. But what we like is ones where there is a specific kind of target date, because we need that nudge to make a decision. If it's just a general membership scheme where we just we can contribute, but there's no specific end date, we're less likely to make a decision. So having an end date is a good idea, and we do want to make sure that any open access we fund is seen as an alternative way of funding titles that would otherwise have been traditionally published and sold. We don't want any open access projects for funding to be a way to significantly increase output, because that's problematic from a budget perspective. And finally, if it's best if institutions in these open access models receive some type of benefit for helping to fund, for instance, access to the backlist or discount on purchase of print that will justify the expenditure. That's especially important from the public university perspective because of rules around procurement. I am going to rush through the rest of these slides. Same challenges of MARC records and knowing what's in a collection that were present for the full collection is true for crowdfunding, and the lack of OA indicators in the vendor system. Finally, I'll just say we have one small EBA for backlist, one small DDA with a handful of publishers. We know we have many peer institutions that do a lot more with DDA and EBA. They're viable models, but just not what we prefer to do. And then finally, I would like to leave some closing thoughts. It's unlikely that open access is going to replace traditional sales models for university presses anytime soon. So we need presses to continue to offer multiple business models. We know it's challenging, but each library has to make a decision based on the factors that are important to them. And we're committed to the success of university presses. We want to work with presses to further develop and refine sustainable business models. And with that, I am going to turn things back over to Dave.
Thank you, Kathleen. As mentioned, we'll be talking about some considerations that are on the table for aggregators when it comes to offering university press content to libraries through various business models. However, before I get to that, just a quick introduction, as well as some observations from several of the business models that we already offer to the library market. As you all know, DeGrooter is certainly more than just an aggregator. On an annual basis, our editorial team produces about 2,700 books. Adding on to that, a very rich history that dates back to the 18th century. By the year 2024, that's just next year, we're slated to have over 200,000 titles on our platform, and that's before Brill, making us one of the largest HSS scholarship platforms in the entire world. Some of the most popular models at DeGrooter for university press content include complete copyright year output, single title sales, pick and choose collections, as well as EBA. Now on to those observations. The first type of observations I'd like to provide all of you with are those from general ebook usage on our platform, university press content on our platform. First slide, nothing really earth-shattering here, a bit obvious. Usage is strong and continues to go up. We attribute this to two different things. The first thing is the continued success of our University Press Library program, a program that I'll be talking about in just a few slides. And secondly, the continued curriculum integration of this valuable content into curriculum across the globe. So when does usage peak? We recently took a look at this from several different perspectives. The slide that you're looking at right now highlights that previous full copyright year sees the highest amount of use in a given year. We've done this for all of our regions, DACH being the German-speaking region of our at DeGrooter, EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and APAC, Asia Pacific, as well as the Americas we have labeled as US there. We utilized the control market where we knew that there were specific institutions that had a consistent amount of content, and that control also showed that the previous full copyright year sees the highest amount of usage in any given year. Now on to some observations from our University Press Library program. As a quick introduction, UPL for short is the ability for libraries to purchase complete copyright year collections from prestigious university presses, such as the University of California Press and Bristol University Press, amongst others. It is a one-time purchase with unlimited usage, as well as no DRM. First observation is that complete copyright year collections certainly have library appeal. On the left-hand side of the grid, you'll see sales to different sized press content to libraries based on the number of libraries that are acquiring the content from these presses. Moving over to the right to 2023, the number of library participants for an average press amongst those three different press types. Taking large presses, for example, you'll see that the number of library participants in our University Press Library model has doubled in the past 3 years. So certainly an indication that complete copyright year collections have library appeal. However, one thing to keep in mind is that this content is from mission-driven organizations whose output isn't tremendous in terms of number of titles. Tremendous, of course, on the quality and scholarship side of things, but on average, a university press comes out with around 130 titles a year, as opposed to thousands by some other publishers. So certainly something to bear in mind. The second observation, which is a little more, I suppose, intriguing, shows 2 different years of purchases by new University Press Library purchasers. In 2022, about 2/3 of the collections purchased by libraries that were new to the program came from one-time or older collections versus 1/3, which were from front list, renewable, recurring collections. However, in 2023, we saw those figures flip. More specifically, actually, it looks like about 4/5 or 80% of the sales from new UPL customers were from front list purchases, and about 20% from one-time older collections. A very interesting trend, something that we'll be keeping our eyes on. And it does beg the question, are one-time purchases a thing of the past? What has influenced this move? And finally, just a few EBA observations from my side. Just a quick note that EBA is a model that we offer in our DACH region, APAC, as well as EMEA, but not necessarily in our Americas region. But the detail that will be provided in the upcoming slides is quite interesting nonetheless. Observation number one, we've got two sets of stats here on this slide. In summary, the observation is that recent copyright year titles within the EBA program that de Gruyter offers in the noted regions is in quite high demand. More specifically, on the left-hand side, content from the recent 3 to 4 year copyright year titles are 5 times more likely to be converted or selected versus titles from before 2014. On the right-hand side, you'll see titles from those same most recent 4 years are 2 times more likely to be converted as a percentage of the whole conversions versus usage from those years. In other words, content from the most recent years from university presses is in very, very high demand. Another EBA-related observation comes in the form of this pie chart here. I don't have anything indicating as to what it is, but what you're looking at is total usage from our EBA program from calendar year 2022, broken down from exactly what presses the usage is coming from. And the question is, as de Gruyter continues to grow, as a program such as ours, our EBA program continues to add more presses, our university presses, as well as de Gruyter, who's included in a lot of our EBA offerings, are we reaching a point of diluted exposure? Just a stat to go along with this slide, in 2022, 22 presses made up 95% of EBA usage. However, just 2 years ago, that was 15 presses making up 95% of usage within EBA. So with all of these observations, I've got a list here of major considerations for aggregators. Starting at the top and really recurring throughout the entire list here is press sustainability. This is something that is paramount for de Gruyter. And when we're thinking about what models that we offer, this is the one thing that we keep coming back to. Is what we're providing a sustainable model for our presses? And we are avoiding at all costs, for example, a race to the bottom. That's not something that we want to get ourselves into. We want to make sure that whatever is being provided to libraries is something that is a sustainable source of revenue for our press partners. Also considering the University Press Library offering, aggregators should certainly think about what they're offering to libraries and whether or not that is an acquisition solution for those libraries. Anyone could just provide single titles or aggregated packages, but is what being provided to the library community making collection development easier? Is it freeing up time on the librarian side of things so that they could do those other tasks, as Kathleen had indicated during her set? And finally, a number of other items that aggregators should consider when developing business model offerings for libraries for university press content. Are their offerings serving all library types and regions? Is there a balance between recurring and one-time purchases in what's being offered? Thank you very much. And up next is Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Jo Gregg. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director at Bristol University Press. Thanks very much for inviting me to join the talk. Just a quick summary of who we are, because if you don't know where Bristol is, imagine a map of the UK, think southwest, that's where you'll find Bristol, which is a fantastic city. And as the head of the press, sales marketing at the press, I just wanted to remind you that Policy Press is an imprint that has been around and part of the Bristol portfolio for a long time. So that's who we are. It was interesting, Eric mentioned mission, because it's really important to university presses, of course, and that is our mission. We publish books across the social sciences, but with a real focus on the global social challenges, and we were the first UK UP to sign up for the UN Sustainable Development Goals impact, which is really important to us and really drives what we do and drives our publishing output. If you move on to the next slide, Dave, it was really interesting to think about this when I looked at our data, just to look at how our book sales have changed over the last few years. And I thought it'd be interesting just to show you that trajectory. We were well ahead of the curve in that we had lots of our books already digitized, but you can see that actually 3 years ago we had about 42% of our sales were digital and the rest print. This year we've still got a bit of a year to go, but we're looking at about 56% digital, and we know that because a lot of our portfolio is monograph driven, and that's going through to the libraries, and it's been a really important part of our trajectory and our growth. You can see 300 books a year coming through, and 80% of that is going to the libraries. If you go to the next slide, Dave, what I wanted to just flag, coming from the UK, it's also really, really interesting that we have a big international market, and not just the US, and not just thinking about the AUP kind of portfolio, but the UK international. And you can see that our sales have really changed, and that's come partly because our authors have come from a much more international perspective. We've really, really tried to bring in more international authors, but also that we've been really reaching out into more international markets. And we're doing that a lot through our library aggregators. It's really helping us build our portfolio and our brand into those markets. And you'll see that actually the shift is quite significant. And actually we've tipped over to being much bigger in international. That's 52% compared to 48 there at the moment this time of the year. If you go to the next slide, Dave, I just wanted to talk about how democratic we've been in terms of how we supply our ebooks. Obviously we're working with De Gruyter, which has been a really important part this year, but we do supply all of the channels. And talking to Kathleen's point about making sure that we are supplying libraries, and we have libraries that want content in lots of different ways. So we do supply lots of channels, and we do supply all of the aggregators with our content, De Gruyter being a really important one. And we also launched our own new platform. So we know that you as librarians want content in the easiest and the simplest way. And the next slide we talk to and supply lots of different models. These are our top models, and we do individual titles, and we do total collections through De Gruyter, and we do supply EBA and DDA. The reason being, as a small UK university press, we're one of the top 5, but we know that you won't often know our lists. We've got really strong titles in social and public policy, sociology, criminology, but they're titles that have had a UK and European focus. And so talking to the US market, which is where De Gruyter have been really strong for us, and Canada, it's you might not know our titles. You'll know that you've had them and you've had them listed on your approval plans, but you might not know us as an imprint. And so we want to give you the chance to be able to try and make sure that you are getting the value that you need before you actually purchase them. So those are our top ebook models. I think it's really important, when I was thinking about this presentation, is that one, Eric mentioned it, but the one key stakeholder in this relationship, and the one contract that we have, is with our authors. They come to us because they want to supply a piece of work they have spent years creating. That research has often been a long time in making, and we are given the honor of being able to disseminate it to the scholarly ecosystem, and that's our job, and we take that really seriously. And we want to make sure that our authors know that we're going to be sharing and spreading their work as far and wide as we possibly can. And that's a really important part of our relationship and our USP as a publisher. Like lots of university presses, we want to make sure that we're doing the best for our authors, and that we take that really seriously. So our authors are a really key stakeholder, as is the university. We're part of the faculty of the university, and we support the university's strategies, and we want to make sure that we tick all of that international research and making sure we get global reach. We don't just publish University of Bristol authors, of course, we publish international authors, but those are really key drivers for us. And the last thing to say really is that we are next slide, really passionate about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and making sure that we are not just talking lip service to these, but we have a series of pillars that we bring into our publishing, and you'll see those come through in all of the research that we do, but also our cross-cutting projects like EDI and accessibility. They're really, really key to us, and we make sure that we deliver on them. We really respond to our library. We have a fabulous library advisory board that we talk to regularly, and it's an international library board from people from all around the world. And so from listening to our library community is really important, and we want to make sure that we are hearing what you say, feeding it into our strategy and what we do to develop things differently. And then we're coming on to the last slide, which is open access, which we talked about earlier in the session, and it's absolutely crucial. Is it going to have an impact? Absolutely. And we need to make sure that we are being sustainable. We have a business that can support it. And we've got various initiatives, including Open Up, which is a university initiative that comes together, UK university initiative that we bring together, where we're looking at funding from our libraries, and which offers free waivers to international authorship. So it's a really important part of it. So there are some key considerations for us going forward. We are not for profit, and if you go to the next slide, Dave, that would be great. We are not just thinking with a US lens, we're thinking with an international lens, especially to Southeast Asia and over kind of to the West. It's really important that we get the right model for different markets, not just thinking about our core markets, but thinking internationally. We're not for profit, as I said, with sustainable business models. We don't need to make a profit, but we need to be able to wipe our nose, which is really important. We need to have flexible options for libraries, because everybody has different budgets, and we've seen that over the last 3 years. It was interesting, Kathleen's point about discoverability is really key for us, making sure that we are visible through the systems, and making sure that we are ticking all the boxes for the universities, our authors, and for us as a press. Over to you, Dave.
Hey, great, Joe. Thank you very much. And thank you to Kathleen as well as Eric. It's now time for Q&A.